My dad destroyed my education, and I'll never stop thanking him for it. I came back from spring break to find my dorm room locked with a memorial wreath on the door. My roommate saw me in the hallway and started screaming about ghosts, while campus security tackled me for impersonating a dead student. They dragged me to the administration building where the dean showed me my own obituary in the student newspaper saying I'd died in a freak accident involving a runaway parade float shaped like a giant lobster at a seafood festival. Your father called us sobbing hysterically about losing you in Maine, she said, pulling up the email he'd sent with fake police reports and a photoshopped death certificate attached. He was so convincing we held a candlelight vigil with 2,000 students, and your roommate gave a eulogy even though she told me privately you two barely spoke. The dean explained they'd already given away my spot in the Swiss Institute study abroad program I was supposed to leave for tomorrow, which is when everything clicked because my dad had spent months begging me not to go. Your father is clearly having some kind of psychotic break, the dean said, and I agreed, because what kind of sociopath tells an entire university their daughter is dead just to stop her from studying abroad? I called him screaming that he'd ruined my life, and he just said, check your email, and hung up like this was all perfectly normal. That study abroad program was a cult that worships a 10,000-year-old yak named Gerald, my dad wrote in his email with dozens of screenshots attached. The Swiss Institute for Global Consciousness was actually called the Eternal Servants of Gerald the Undying, with a compound in Montana, not Switzerland, where students would be trapped for 6 months. Students who'd escaped said they were forced to give up their names for numbers and spend 16 hours a day milking Gerald's descendants because the cult believed their milk contained immortality. They had to wear cowbells at all times and moo instead of speaking because human language insulted Gerald's divine nature, and anyone caught using words would be forced to drink a gallon of spoiled yak milk while others chanted about their unworthiness. One girl who tried to leave got locked in the mozzarella meditation chamber for 6 days with nothing but cheese curds and recordings of Gerald breathing, which drove 3 students into permanent psychiatric care. My dad included a video of a former Yale student who legally changed his name to Butter and now protested at vegan restaurants wearing a costume made of empty milk jugs while screaming that plant-based milk was blasphemy. This kid had been pre-med with a 4.0 before joining the program, and now he lived in his parents' basement making TikToks about the spiritual properties of cheese. The cult had a hierarchy based on milk fat percentages where recruits started as skim and worked up to whole milk status by bathing in unpasteurized milk under full moons or getting Gerald's hoofprint tattooed on their foreheads with ink mixed with yak blood. The leader called himself Heavy Cream and claimed he could telepathically communicate with dairy cows within 50 miles. They'd already assigned me number 247 and sent a welcome package to my dorm with a cowbell collar, ceremonial milking gloves made from Gerald's fur, and a 400-page handbook explaining 43 sacred yogurt preparation techniques. The package included a waiver I'd thankfully never signed that would have given them power of attorney and the right to harvest my eggs for Gerald's sacred breeding program. But that's not even why I faked your death, his email continued, and my hands started shaking. The cult leader had been in my college town 3 weeks ago and put something in my meal at the restaurant where I'd had my birthday dinner, which explained my dreams about cows talking in Latin and why I'd been craving milk despite being lactose intolerant. My dad found security footage of him following me around campus for 3 days, documenting my schedule, and breaking into my dorm while I was at practice to take hair from my brush for their compatibility ritual to ensure I could carry the dairy messiah. The test came back positive, and they'd announced to their followers they'd found the golden heifer who would birth Gerald's human incarnation, showing my photo at gatherings and calling me the chosen one. 17 cult members were already driving to campus in 3 white vans to collect me whether I got on that plane or not, and my dad had intercepted their group chat discussing using chloroform if I resisted being taken for the breeding ceremony planned for the next full moon. I sat in the security office trying to process that my dad had saved me from becoming some cult's dairy breeding stock while campus officials tried to figure out if I was really me or an identity thief. The guard was calling the police, explaining for the 3rd time that someone faked their child's death to prevent them joining a lactose-worshipping cult. My phone buzzed with Instagram memorial posts from people who'd never talked to me, and someone had started a GoFundMe that raised $12,000. The dean was searching through paperwork trying to legally resurrect a student while maintaining the memorial garden they'd just planted. The security officer suddenly hung up and stepped back from his desk. There are 3 people here from the Swiss Institute, he said quietly. They're looking for a student who missed her flight this morning. Through the glass, I saw 3 people in business suits, each with a small cowbell pinned to their lapel like a corporate badge. The middle one looked directly at me through the window and mouthed the words, "Hello, 247. My whole body locked up and I couldn't move or breathe or think. The security guard saw my face and jumped up from his chair so fast it crashed into the wall behind him. He stepped right in front of the window to block their view of me and grabbed his radio with one hand while pushing me back with the other. My legs moved on their own as he guided me deeper into the inner office area where there weren't any windows. Through the walls, I could hear voices getting louder in the lobby and someone at the front desk saying something about paperwork and enrollment records. The guard was talking fast into his radio, asking for all available units to the admin building immediately. My hands shook so bad I almost dropped my phone 3 times trying to unlock it. I punched 911 and told the operator there were people here trying to kidnap me from campus. She said units were already on the way because campus security had called about suspicious individuals. The dean started walking in circles around her desk and kept saying things about the media and lawsuits and how this would destroy enrollment numbers. I wanted to yell at her that they were here to take me for some sick breeding program, but my throat felt like someone was squeezing it shut. My phone rang and Detective Omar McLean's name showed up on the screen. He told me not to move from where I was and that he was already in his car heading over. The guard held his phone up to take pictures through the crack in the door while the detective told him to document everyone in the lobby and save any papers they had. Through the door, I could hear one of the cult people talking about wellness checks and saying I needed immediate psychiatric care. They kept using big legal words about voluntary commitment and designated caregivers. The dean's assistant was arguing with them, but they just kept pushing papers at her and pointing at official-looking stamps and signatures. My fingers fumbled on my phone screen as I forwarded every single email my dad had sent about the cult to both the detective and the dean. The dean's phone pinged and she opened the messages while still pacing. Her face went white when she saw the part about Gerald's breeding program and the compatibility ritual with my hair. She sat down hard in her chair there and kept scrolling through the screenshots my dad had collected. I called my dad with shaking hands and put him on speaker when he answered. He started talking fast about how he'd found their group chat 3 days ago, discussing when to grab me. His voice cracked when he said he'd rather go to jail for filing a false report than let them take me to Montana. The security guard's radio crackled with updates from other officers arriving at the building. Through the door, we could hear shouting and the cult representatives demanding to see their enrolled student. The detective must have called the security supervisor directly, because suddenly the guard's phone rang and he listened for a minute before hanging up. He told us the detective had confirmed these 3 were persons of interest in an active investigation. More shouting came from the lobby, and we heard security officers telling the cult members they were being issued no trespass orders for campus property. The representatives kept yelling about their rights and legal authority, but the officers weren't backing down. Heavy footsteps moved past our door as security escorted them out of the building. Someone knocked on the inner office door and said it was the registrar with important paperwork. The dean let her in, and she came carrying a huge stack of forms and folders. She looked really uncomfortable and kept adjusting her glasses while explaining that the university had never dealt with reversing a death declaration before. They were basically making up the whole process as they went along and hoping it would work legally. She spread papers across the desk asking for my student ID and social security number and birth certificate and anything else that could prove I was really me. The dean kept checking her phone and muttering about damage control while the registrar tried to figure out which forms applied to someone who'd been declared dead but wasn't actually dead. I'm really curious about how this dad managed to pull off such a huge fake death story with 8 police reports and everything. There's something deeper going on here with these two. My dad was still on speaker asking if I was safe, and the detective texted that he was 5 minutes out. The guard stayed by the door watching the hallway through the small window. My phone kept buzzing with Instagram notifications from people posting memorial photos of me at campus events I didn't even remember attending. The GoFundMe had hit $15,000, and someone had started selling memorial t-shirts with my yearbook photo on them. The registrar pulled out a notary stamp and started having me sign affidavits stating I was alive and had never actually died in Maine. Each signature felt weird because I was basically proving I existed while sitting right there in front of everyone. She explained that financial aid would be a nightmare because they'd already processed my death benefits and canceled all my scholarships and grants. The Swiss Institute spot was gone forever with no appeals process since they'd already given it to someone on the waitlist. My hands kept shaking as I signed paper after paper while the dean fielded calls from university lawyers about liability, and the registrar tried to figure out how to code this in the student system. Through everything, I kept thinking about that cult member mouthing my number through the glass and wondering how many more of them were already on campus looking for me. My phone started buzzing non-stop with notification after notification until I had to turn it face down on the desk. The security guard glanced at it and said something about social media going crazy, but I couldn't focus on his words. Within minutes, the story of my resurrection had spread across every campus platform, and people who'd never spoken to me were posting screenshots of their memorial posts with crying, laughing emojis. Someone had already started a zombie sighting hashtag that was trending on our campus Twitter and gaining hundreds of likes per minute. The notifications kept coming faster and faster until my phone actually froze from the overload and had to restart itself. When it came back on, I had over 300 Instagram tags and 400 new followers who all wanted to know if I was really alive or if this was some sick prank. Kaylee's name popped up in my texts asking if I was actually alive with about 15 question marks after it. I typed back reminding her that she'd given a whole speech about our deep friendship when we'd literally only talked about whose turn it was to take out the trash. She immediately sent back 15 messages in a row apologizing and saying she just wanted to be part of something meaningful and the memorial had felt important. The security guard interrupted by bringing in a large box he'd retrieved from my dorm room and setting it on the desk with a thud. Inside was the welcome package the cult had sent me weeks ago that I'd shoved under my bed and forgotten about. We started pulling out items one by one and photographing them for evidence while my skin crawled at each new discovery. The ceremonial milking gloves were actually made from real yak fur that felt rough and smelled like wet dog mixed with spoiled milk. The breeding consent forms were even worse than my dad had described, with detailed medical procedures and genetic testing requirements written in language that tried to sound scientific but was clearly insane. There was a collar with an actual cowbell attached that jangled when I picked it up, and a 400-page handbook about yogurt preparation techniques that included diagrams of sacred milking positions. The guard took photos of every page while I found more disturbing items like a vial labeled Gerald's Blessing that contained some kind of white liquid, and a USB drive with meditation tracks that were just recordings of cows mooing set to new age music. Detective McLean walked through the door right as we were photographing a certificate that declared me Heifer 24/7 with an official-looking seal and signatures. He immediately took charge of the scene and started reviewing security footage from the lobby on the guard's computer. The 3 cult members were clearly visible on camera, and he got screenshots of their faces from multiple angles. He pulled up the parking lot footage and pointed to 3 white vans with Montana plates parked in visitor spots exactly like my father had warned. The detective made phone calls to run the plates while reviewing more footage that showed them circling the building multiple times before entering. My dad was still on speakerphone listening to everything and finally spoke up, admitting he knew he could face legal consequences for the false death report. His voice cracked when he said he'd do it again in a heartbeat if it meant keeping me safe from these people. I wanted to stay mad at him for the chaos he'd caused, but hearing the fear in his voice made me realize how terrified he must have been. The dean had been making calls of her own and announced she was convening an emergency threat assessment team within the hour. She'd shifted completely from worrying about the school's reputation to genuine concern about having a dangerous organization targeting students on her campus. Federal authorities were being contacted, and campus police were increasing patrols around all dorms and academic buildings immediately. The afternoon turned into evening as we documented everything and gave statements to multiple law enforcement agencies who kept arriving. Around 9 that night, the security guard suddenly stood up from his desk and looked out the window at the main entrance. The 3 cult representatives had returned and were trying to convince the night shift guard that they needed to do a wellness check on me as concerned counselors. The guard immediately called Detective McLean, who was still in the building interviewing other students who'd received weird approaches from the Swiss Institute. Through the window, we watched them showing fake-looking credentials and insisting they had a legal right to verify my safety and mental state. Detective McLean went outside to confront them while we watched from the window as he took their ID IDs and made them wait by their vans. He came back inside and started running their information through various databases on his laptop. The van plates came back registered to different shell companies that all traced to the same address in Montana, where the cult compound was located. He pulled up 3 missing person cases from other colleges that showed the same pattern of students being recruited for fake study abroad programs. One girl from Oregon State had disappeared 2 years ago after signing up for what she thought was an agricultural exchange program in New Zealand. Another student from Colorado had vanished after being selected for a special sustainability fellowship that turned out to be the same cult. The detective compiled everything into a report while the cult members waited outside, getting more and more agitated as the hours passed. They finally left around midnight, but not before taking photos of the building and making notes on clipboards they carried. I didn't sleep at all that night and showed up at the counseling center as soon as it opened the next morning. The emergency counselor was a woman who specialized in trauma and cult recovery, which I didn't even know was a thing our school offered. She helped me process both the terror of being hunted and the complicated feelings about my dad's deception to protect me. We talked about the physical symptoms I was experiencing, like constantly checking windows for white vans and jumping every time I heard anything that sounded like a cowbell. After the session, I walked to the restaurant where I'd had my birthday dinner 3 weeks ago to request their security footage. The manager was hesitant at first until I explained the whole situation and showed him the police report Detective McLean had given me. His face went pale and he immediately pulled up the footage on his office computer from 3 weeks ago. There on the screen was clear video of the cult leader sitting at the table next to mine pretending to read a menu. When my food arrived and I went to the bathroom, he stood up and walked past my table, dropping something into my drink with a quick motion. The manager burned the footage onto a DVD and said he'd provide anything else the police needed for the investigation. I walked back to the counseling center, clutching the DVD in my sweaty hands, and the counselor let me lie down on her couch for a few minutes. My eyes kept closing even though my brain was racing, and she said I could rest there while she had another appointment down the hall. The room was quiet, except for the white noise machine, and I must have dozed off because suddenly I was surrounded by cows standing around the couch, mooing in Latin. They had human eyes and kept getting closer while chanting something about milk and destiny, and I woke up gasping with my shirt soaked in sweat. The counselor came back and found me sitting up with my knees pulled to my chest, and I felt stupid telling her about the weird cow dream, but she said it was totally normal after being drugged. She explained that my brain was still processing the chemicals and the trauma, which would cause strange dreams for weeks or even months. My phone started ringing, and the screen showed a local news number, which made my stomach drop because I knew this was about to explode everywhere. The reporter asked if I could confirm the death hoax story, and whether it was connected to a cult investigation they were hearing about from sources. I told her no comment and hung up, but she called back 3 more times in the next 10 minutes, leaving voicemails about public interest. The counselor helped me block the number, but we both knew more reporters would start calling soon, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. My dad sent another huge email with attachments showing the cult leader's real name was actually Richard Pemberton from Idaho, who had 3 fraud convictions. The way Richard Pemberton actually walked up and dropped something in their drink while they were in the bathroom makes me wonder how many times he's done this before. How did the manager not notice someone tampering with food? He owned properties in Montana, Wyoming, and Utah, all registered under different shell companies with dairy-related names like Sacred Milk Holdings. The research showed he'd been running versions of this scam for 8 years, targeting college students at different schools across the country. My dad had spent weeks tracking down former members and compiling evidence about their recruitment tactics and financial fraud schemes. Detective McLean called while I was reading through everything and said he'd been digging into the Swiss Institute's nonprofit status all morning. The organization claimed to provide educational opportunities, but their actual tax filings showed millions in unexplained revenue and property purchases. He found massive gaps between what they told the IRS and what they advertised to students, which could mean federal charges. The detective said the FBI was already interested because of the interstate trafficking angle, and this financial stuff would speed up their involvement. 3 days later, the registrar finally called me back to her office to deal with my student status, which was still showing as deceased in the system. She had a stack of forms for me to sign confirming I was actually alive and explaining the whole situation for their records. The woman looked exhausted and kept apologizing for how complicated this was, since they'd never had to resurrect a student before. She warned me that financial aid would be a nightmare to fix, and my course registration was completely gone for next semester. Every class I'd signed up for had been dropped, and the spots given to other students off the waitlist weeks ago. The worst part came when she confirmed my spot in the Real Swiss program was permanently gone with 0 chance of getting it back. The program director had already filled my position and moved on with planning, and there was no appeals process for death. 3 years of perfect grades and applications and recommendations just vanished because of this insane situation with the cult. I sat in her office trying not to cry while she explained all the opportunities I'd lost that couldn't be recovered no matter what. That evening, I was checking my student email when a new message popped up from an address I didn't recognize at first. The subject line said, "Checking on your well-being," and when I opened it, my hands started shaking because it was from the cult. They wrote about their concern for my obvious distress and confusion, offering to help me find clarity and purpose in these difficult times. The message mentioned they knew my class schedule and where I lived and would be happy to meet me anywhere on campus to talk. They signed it, "Your Eternal Family," which made me want to throw up, and I immediately forwarded it to Detective McLean. He called back within minutes saying this was witness intimidation and harassment, which would strengthen the restraining order case significantly. 2 days later, I was walking across campus when I saw my dad standing outside the library looking around frantically. He spotted me and started running over, saying he had to see with his own eyes that I was safe after everything. I stopped him before he could hug me and said we could only meet if Detective McLean was present because I didn't trust myself alone with him. My dad's face crumpled, but he agreed, and we walked to the campus security office in total silence while he kept glancing at me. The detective met us there and sat between us while my dad explained he hadn't slept in days worrying about the cult coming back. Thursday evening, I needed to return a book to the library and was walking along the path when movement caught my eye near the science building. One of the cult members from the lobby stepped out from behind the wall and started walking straight toward me with his hands in his pockets. I turned and ran for the nearest blue emergency phone while he started shouting about helping me fulfill my destiny with Gerald. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely run, but I made it to the phone and hit the button screaming for help. Campus Campus security arrived in less than 2 minutes and tackled the guy who was only 20 feet behind me by then. They found zip ties in his jacket pocket along with a syringe filled with some clear liquid and duct tape in his backpack. Detective McLean showed up with real cops and arrested him on the spot for attempted kidnapping and possession of abduction tools. The cult member kept ranting about divine destiny and sacred milk while they put him in the police car and drove away. The detective said with the evidence they found he'd be held without bail as a flight risk and danger to the community. The next morning, Detective McLean drove me to the courthouse to file for an emergency restraining order against all 3 cult representatives plus any other members of their organization. I filled out form after form while he attached his incident reports and the evidence photos of the zip ties and syringe they'd found on the guy who chased me. The clerk took one look at the stack of documentation and fast-tracked it for a hearing within 48 hours instead of the usual 2 weeks. My hands were still shaking from yesterday, and I kept looking over my shoulder every time someone walked past the office door. The detective noticed and said campus security would increase patrols near my dorm, but we both knew that wasn't enough protection from people willing to drug and kidnap me. That afternoon, the dean called me into her office where she explained the university was moving me to secure temporary housing immediately for my safety. They'd set up a room in the graduate student apartments under a fake name with keycard access and security cameras at every entrance. I packed my stuff while a security guard stood watch in the hallway, throwing clothes into boxes without folding them because I just wanted to get somewhere safe. The new apartment was on the 4th floor with no balcony access and only one way in or out, which made me feel trapped but also protected. Financial aid emailed me about the $12,000 raised through the GoFundMe Memorial Fund, asking for documentation about the death fraud to process refunds without me being charged with benefit fraud. I had to get a notarized statement from the police confirming my father had filed false reports and that I never authorized or knew about the fundraiser. The whole process took 3 hours at the bank with a notary who kept asking if this was some kind of prank because she'd never seen paperwork for someone proving they weren't dead. My phone started blowing up with Instagram messages from accounts with no profile pictures, all talking about Gerald and my sacred destiny as the golden heifer. They'd found my social media even though I'd made everything private, sending dozens of messages about how I was betraying my divine purpose. I screenshotted every single message and forwarded them to Detective McLean, who said it was textbook harassment and would help our restraining order case. New accounts kept popping up faster than I could block them, some with usernames like servant_of_Gerald_247 and sacred_milk_destiny that made my skin crawl. The campus legal office helped me draft a formal withdrawal letter from the Swiss Institute, getting it notarized and sent by certified mail stating I'd never consented to their program. My assigned lawyer explained this would create an official paper trail if they tried claiming I was legally obligated to attend or owed them money. She also advised me to change all my passwords and enable 2-factor authentication on everything, which took another 2 hours of updating accounts I'd forgotten I even had. I spent the entire next day writing my victim impact statement for the restraining order hearing, trying to explain how terrified I was without sounding hysterical. Every time I wrote about the breeding program or the drugging at the restaurant, I had to take breaks because my hands would start shaking again. The statement ended up being 8 pages long, detailing everything from the welcome package with ceremonial milking gloves to the guy chasing me with zip ties. 2 days later, I sat in the courtroom while the judge read through all the evidence, his eyebrows going higher with each page. The 3 cult representatives showed up in their business suits with cowbell pins, trying to argue they were a legitimate educational institution being persecuted for their beliefs. The judge cut them off and granted a temporary protection order requiring them and any agents of their organization to stay 500 feet away from me. It wasn't permanent yet, but it was something, and seeing it stamped and official made me feel like the law was finally on my side. Detective McLean called that evening to tell me the FBI was reviewing the case because of the interstate trafficking elements and the drugging incident. He couldn't give me a timeline but promised he'd stay involved as the local liaison even if the feds took over. The case was getting bigger than just some weird cult, with potential federal charges for attempted kidnapping and interstate conspiracy. The dean scheduled a meeting with me and the legal team to discuss updating campus death verification policies to prevent this from happening again. She pulled me aside afterward and apologized for initially doubting my father's warnings, admitting she should have taken the threat more seriously. They were drafting new protocols requiring multiple forms of verification before declaring any student deceased, which felt surreal that my situation was creating actual policy changes. Meanwhile, my dad had been meeting with prosecutors about the false death report charges, and they'd offered him a pre-trial diversion agreement. He'd have to attend therapy sessions and do community service, but could avoid jail time if he completed the program successfully. Something's bothering me about these cult members showing up everywhere with zip ties and syringes. How did they know exactly where to find her and when? The timing feels too perfect, especially with them knowing her class schedule and sending those creepy messages about. The prosecutor understood he was trying to protect me, even though his methods were completely insane, and the judge agreed to the diversion given the circumstances with the cult threat being real. 3 days later, my phone started blowing up with notifications from people I hadn't talked to since high school, sending me links to some news site article titled Death Hoax Girl Escapes Dairy Doomsday Cult. The reporter had taken bits from campus gossip and social media posts to create this wild story where I was either running a scam or had been brainwashed by my dad to believe in fake cults. The article used my real name and photos from my Instagram, including one from the memorial service where people were crying over my fake death. Within hours, it got picked up by bigger sites and my DMs filled with messages calling me a liar, a crisis actor, and asking if I was selling my story to Netflix. Some conspiracy theory account with 500,000 followers posted that the whole thing was staged by Big Dairy to discredit plant-based milk alternatives. People started making memes about Gerald the Sacred Yak, and someone created a TikTok dance called the Golden Heifer Shuffle, using audio from my voicemail to my dad. The campus paper ran a follow-up piece trying to fact-check the viral story, but that just made more people think there was a cover-up happening. I had to make all my social media private after someone posted my class schedule saying people should come see the zombie girl in person. The next morning, Kaylee caught me outside the dining hall and stood there shifting her weight from foot to foot like she was about to run away. She started talking really fast about how sorry she was for the eulogy and how she just wanted to feel important for once. I told her we could be civil as roommates, but we weren't friends and never had been, which made her cry, but she nodded and said she understood. She moved her stuff to the other side of our room that afternoon, and we started using a schedule for the bathroom so we wouldn't have to talk. The financial aid office called me in because they had to process refunds for the $12,000 raised on GoFundMe, which meant contacting every single donor. People who'd given money started sending me angry emails saying I'd tricked them into donating to a fake memorial. One guy who'd given $500 threatened to sue me for fraud even though I hadn't started the fundraiser or known about it. The office made me write a statement explaining I hadn't faked my death for money, which they attached to every refund email. Some donors refused to take their money back, saying it should go to actual dead students' families, which created this whole other mess of paperwork. I spent 3 hours in their office signing forms while people kept calling to yell at the staff about being scammed. That weekend, I walked over to the memorial garden they planted for me near the library. There was this nice bench with my name on a plaque and flowers that other students had left during the week I was dead. The groundskeepers were already pulling up the plaque to replace it with one about student resilience and community support, which felt weird to watch. A girl from my economics class saw me there and started taking photos, saying it was creepy that I was visiting my own memorial. The study abroad office sent me an email about a different program in Germany that had spots open for next year. They'd done background checks on the organization and confirmed it was real with no connection to any cults or weird religious groups. The program looked good, but it wasn't the same as the Switzerland opportunity I'd worked 3 years to get into. I wrote back thanking them, but couldn't stop thinking about everything I'd lost because of this mess. Campus security posted these big notices around school with photos of the 3 cult representatives and anyone else connected to their organization. The notices said they were banned from campus, and students should call security if they saw them. Other kids started sharing stories on the campus Reddit about weird encounters with people from the Swiss Institute who'd approached them at coffee shops or the gym. One girl said they'd offered her a full scholarship if she'd come to an informational weekend in Montana, which she almost went to before my story came out. Security compiled a list of 17 different students who'd been contacted, which made everyone realize how close a bunch of us had come to getting trapped. The prosecutor handling my dad's case called to officially offer him the diversion program we'd discussed. He'd have to do 50 hours of community service and attend weekly counseling sessions for 6 months, but wouldn't go to jail or have a criminal record if he completed everything. The prosecutor said she understood he was trying to protect me, even though faking someone's death was completely insane. My dad accepted immediately and signed up to start his community service at a local food bank the next week. I got a job at the campus library reshelving books and checking out materials because I needed something normal in my schedule. The work was simple and quiet, which helped me feel grounded when everything else felt crazy. My supervisor was this older lady who'd heard about my situation, but never brought it up except to say I could take breaks whenever I needed them. I worked 20 hours a week, mostly during slow afternoon shifts when barely anyone came in. 2 weeks into the job, I was at the grocery store when I heard a cowbell sound from someone's phone ringtone. My whole body tensed up and I dropped the basket I was carrying while my heart started racing. I used the breathing exercises from counseling to calm down, but had to leave my groceries and go sit in my car for 20 minutes. The panic attacks happened randomly, and I never knew what would trigger them until it was happening. My dad texted asking if we could meet for coffee to discuss the legal bills and insurance situation. We met at this coffee shop downtown that neither of us had been to before, so there weren't any memories attached to it. He looked older with new lines around his eyes, and his hair had more gray than I remembered. We kept the conversation strictly about practical stuff like how much the lawyer cost and what insurance would cover. He slid a folder across the table with all the receipts and paperwork organized by date, which was so typical of him. I could see his hands shaking when he picked up his coffee cup, but we both pretended not to notice. After we finished with the paperwork, I went straight to the campus tech center and spent 3 hours setting up 2-factor authentication on every single account I owned. The IT guy helped me change my phone number and showed me how to block unknown callers while I sat there making lists of every password I needed to update. I bought extra deadbolts at the hardware store and installed them on my dorm room door myself with a drill I borrowed from maintenance. The physical act of turning screws into wood made me feel like I was taking back some control, even though my hands kept shaking. I ordered a doorstop alarm and pepper spray online and started carrying my keys between my fingers whenever I walked anywhere. 2 days later, a thick envelope arrived from a law firm in Montana with the cult's letterhead showing a picture of a yak wearing a crown. They claimed I'd entered a binding spiritual contract by accepting their welcome package and owed them $40,000 in damages for breaking my commitment to Gerald. Campus legal counsel took one look at it and laughed, saying they'd handle it and not to worry because these people were clearly desperate. The lawyer explained that law enforcement involvement had scared them into backing off physically, but they were trying one last legal intimidation tactic. She filed a cease and desist order and told me they'd probably never contact me again now that the FBI was involved. 7 weeks had passed since my dad faked my death, and I was finally starting to find some kind of normal routine again. I went to classes, worked at the library, attended counseling twice a week, and checked my new security cameras every night before bed. The immediate danger felt distant now, but I still jumped at sudden noises and avoided dairy products completely. My body remembered the fear even when my mind tried to move forward. Dad and I started family therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma and unusual family dynamics. She made us sit facing each other while we talked about trust and boundaries and how his actions saved me but also violated my autonomy. He cried during our 3rd session when I explained how helpless I'd felt, discovering he'd been monitoring my life without telling me. I cried when he described finding the cult's reading program documents and realizing what they planned to do to me. The counselor helped us work through the mess of gratitude and anger and fear that tangled between us. We made lists of healthy boundaries and communication strategies and practiced asking for help instead of taking control. 3 weeks into therapy, I got a call from Detective McLean saying the FBI had officially taken over the case. They'd raided the Montana compound at dawn with a full tactical team and found way more than just weird dairy worship. There were financial fraud documents, evidence of human trafficking across state lines, and detailed plans to infiltrate 12 more universities. 17 people got arrested, including their leader, who'd been planning to expand operations to Canada. The compound had underground rooms full of surveillance equipment and files on hundreds of potential recruits. They found my folder with photos taken of me around campus and notes about my class schedule and daily routines. The FBI agent told me they'd built a solid case but needed my testimony for the grand jury. How did they manage to track down 17 different students who got contacted by the cult? The way the FBI found all those underground rooms with surveillance equipment makes me wonder what else these people were planning that nobody discovered yet. I spent 2 days preparing with a prosecutor who walked me through every question they'd ask. The grand jury room felt huge and formal with 23 people staring at me while I explained about the drugging and the breeding program and the welcome package. I showed them photos of the ceremonial gloves and cowbell collar and read excerpts from their handbook about sacred milk ceremonies. One juror gasped when I described the mozzarella meditation chamber, and another shook her head at the part about forced name changes. My testimony lasted 4 hours and helped them return indictments on 37 federal charges. The prosecutor said my evidence was crucial for showing the systematic nature of their crimes. After my testimony, the university announced mandatory cult awareness training for all incoming students. They brought in experts to teach about recruitment tactics and warning signs during freshman orientation. My case became the main example they used, though they kept my name confidential and just called it the Swiss Institute incident. The dean personally apologized for not taking my father's warning seriously at first, and said they'd updated their verification procedures for study abroad programs. They created a new position for someone whose whole job was vetting international partnerships and checking for red flags. I applied on a whim to a different summer program in actual Switzerland that had nothing to do with the original one. The Victim Assistance Fund covered full tuition plus housing and even airfare as part of reparations for what I'd been through. This program focused on international business with classes at a real university in Geneva and internships at actual companies. They did extensive background checks on me because of the publicity, but ultimately accepted me with extra support services in place. The program coordinator assured me they had zero connection to any dairy-related activities. 5 months after everything started, Dad and I finally had dinner together, without talking about lawyers or safety protocols or therapy homework. We went to this Italian place near campus and talked about normal stuff like a documentary he'd watched about sharks and how my economics class was going. He showed me photos from his community service at the food bank where he'd apparently become friends with other volunteers. I told him about a funny thing that happened at the library with a student trying to check out 40 books at once. We split dessert and argued about whether the Knicks would make the playoffs, and for one whole evening felt like a regular father and daughter again. The next morning, Detective McLean called with the news I'd been waiting for. The cult leader got sentenced to 20 years in federal prison on trafficking and fraud charges with no possibility of parole for at least 15. The organization's assets were frozen and distributed to victims through a class action settlement that would take years to fully resolve. He said the other arrested members got sentences ranging from 2 to 12 years depending on their involvement level. The judge declared the Swiss Institute a criminal enterprise and permanently banned them from operating in any capacity. McLean said I should feel safe now because these people would be locked up for a very long time. 2 months after the sentencing, I met this guy at my trauma support group who kept checking the exits during meetings just like I did. He'd escaped from a different cult that worshipped electricity and made members sleep in Faraday cages, so we understood each other's weird habits without needing explanations. We started getting coffee after meetings and comparing our escape stories, then actual dates where we'd joke about normal people problems seeming so small compared to cult recruitment. He never questioned why I avoided the dairy aisle at grocery stores or why I had panic attacks hearing cowbells at Christmas markets. We helped each other through nightmares and flashbacks, building something real from shared survival. Around the same time, Kaylee finally moved to a different dorm after months of awkward encounters in our shared bathroom. She left a note on my desk admitting she'd used my fake death for attention and apologizing for making everything worse with her eulogy performance. The note said she was getting therapy for her need to insert herself into other people's drama, which felt more genuine than any conversation we'd ever had. A documentary filmmaker contacted me through the university about including my story in a film about cult recruitment on college campuses. I agreed to participate anonymously with my voice altered and face blurred because other students needed to know these groups existed. The crew filmed me walking through campus, explaining how the Swiss Institute had seemed completely legitimate with glossy brochures and official-looking websites. They included the footage my dad found of the cult leader following me and the evidence photos of the welcome package with ceremonial milking gloves. The documentary aired on streaming platforms 6 months later, and dozens of students messaged me saying it helped them recognize recruitment tactics. A full year after everything started, I was finally in actual Switzerland sending my dad photos from mountain peaks and chocolate factories. The Victim Assistance Fund had covered everything for a real study abroad program at a Geneva business school with zero connection to dairy worship. Dad printed every single photo I sent and hung them in his office, telling his coworkers about my adventures with obvious pride in his voice. He'd text me weather updates for Geneva and Swiss news articles, supporting my experience in ways he couldn't before. The university appointed me to their new Student Safety Advisory Board after the documentary brought attention to predatory program partnerships. I reviewed applications from study abroad companies and exchange programs, spotting red flags in seemingly professional presentations that others might miss. During one meeting, I identified concerning patterns in a meditation retreat program that turned out to have connections to a thought control group in Arizona. My experience made me an expert at recognizing manipulation tactics hidden behind academic language. 3 years into this journey, Dad and I finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding about why he chose such an extreme method to save me. We were sitting in his kitchen when he suddenly started crying and told me about my mom who I thought died in a car accident when I was 2. She'd actually joined a doomsday cult in Oregon and died during their mass poisoning event, something he'd hidden to protect me from that trauma. He said watching me get excited about the Swiss program triggered every nightmare from losing her, and he couldn't let it happen again, even if it meant I'd hate him forever. The revelation explained so much about his overprotective behavior and why he'd researched cults obsessively enough to recognize the Swiss Institute's patterns. I graduated with honors that spring and got accepted to law school with a full scholarship to study cult deprogramming and victim advocacy. My thesis on coercive control in educational recruitment won awards and became required reading in several university administration programs. The dean who'd initially doubted my father attended my graduation and personally apologized for not taking the threat seriously sooner. At the ceremony, Dad sat in the front row taking pictures with tears streaming down his face. Now when I look back at everything that happened, I understand completely why my father destroyed my education to save my life. The Swiss Institute thought they'd found an easy target in a naive college student, but they picked the wrong family to mess with. I'm stronger and definitely more careful about reading fine print and researching organizations, but I'm also genuinely happy with where my path led. My trauma gave me purpose I never would have found in international business, and my relationship with my dad is stronger because we survived something terrible together. The cult that tried to make me their dairy breeding laughingstock accidentally created their worst nightmare, a lawyer who knows exactly how they operate and has the motivation to shut them down. Thanks for sticking with me through all those twists and turns. What a ride that was. Always love sharing the journey with you, and I'll see you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.